My brothers, my sisters, welcome back to the channel. Today we speak not just of Burkina Faso, but of Africa's awakening. If you believe in freedom, unity, and the power of our people, then make sure you subscribe. Share this story, and let the world hear Africa's voice. Because what you are about to witness is not just history, that is destiny. The world didn't notice it at first. A signature, a flash of gold ink beneath the dim glow of a single lamp. A man in military fatigue sat in silence, his face half-shadowed. The desert wind pressing against the old wooden shutters of the presidential office in Ouagadougou. Outside, thunder rolled, low, distant, ancient, like the growl of history awakening. The cameras weren't there. The Western press didn't report it. But in that hour, in that unrecorded moment, Ibrahim Traoré signed something that would echo across continents. The paper was simple, 2 seals, 2 names, Burkina Faso, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. A gold alliance unlike any ever seen before. Within hours, satellite feeds flickered over deserts. Data analysts in Washington whispered across encrypted lines, and a dozen embassies demanded confirmation. Was it true? Had Burkina Faso, one of the poorest nations on earth, just formed a gold partnership with one of the richest oil empires of the modern age? The world didn't understand it yet, but whispers began to spread. Burkina Faso is aligning with the Saudis. Africa's moving against the West. Something's coming. In hidden boardrooms and marble halls, men in suits felt an unease they couldn't name. Because deep beneath that paper signature lay something far more dangerous than gold, a shift in the world's balance of power. They thought it was just an economic deal. They didn't know it was the first spark of a storm. And as the storm outside the palace broke open into rain, a single line burned itself into the future. What followed would shake the very balance of global power. Before the gold, before the signatures, before the fear, there was only dust. Burkina Faso, landlocked, forgotten, and drained. A nation that had given the world everything, its land, its labor, its minerals, and received nothing in return but poverty and scars. The IMF had its claws deep in the country's budget. Loans wrapped in promises, interest disguised as aid. Each year, the government repaid billions, while villages lost schools, hospitals, and crops. In the south, the mines bled slowly, workers digging for flecks of gold they would never touch. Men with hollow eyes swung their picks under the sun, sweating for foreign corporations that sent their treasures far across the seas. And above them all, Ibrahim Traoré watched. Not as a president first, but as a soldier, a son, and a witness. He had walked through villages where mothers boiled stones to silence their children's hunger. He had seen IMF officials arrive in white SUVs, promising stability, while children starved behind them. He had read the reports that declared his people economically unsustainable. But what the reports didn't see was the fire beneath the despair, the quiet defiance of a nation that refused to die. In every corridor of power in Ouagadougou, there was a ghost, Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary whose voice once thundered against colonial chains, haunted every wall, every soldier's memory. His posters, torn and sun-faded, still hung behind desks. His words still echoed in the wind. He who feeds you, controls you. Traoré had grown up in that shadow. He knew what it meant to resist the world's might. He also knew what it meant to be betrayed by your own. When he took power, he inherited not a government, but a skeleton held together by debts and old loyalties. The mining contracts were owned by outsiders. The banks answered to foreign calls, and every move he made was watched by Western diplomats, by the IMF, by those within his own ranks who still served old masters. The price of defiance was isolation. Burkina Faso's borders tightened. Aid was cut. The country's currency, tied to the CFA franc, was weaponized against them. And yet, in those bleakest days, when food convoys stopped coming and fuel lines dried up, something extraordinary began to stir. It started with a rumor, a single conversation in the desert. A Saudi envoy, traveling quietly through North Africa, made an unannounced stop in Ouagadougou. No public photos, no statements, just whispers. The story spread like wildfire among soldiers and ministers. Saudi Arabia wants to invest, not in oil, in gold. But it wasn't just investment, it was a partnership, one that would allow Burkina Faso to keep its own gold reserves, refine them locally, and trade directly with Riyadh. It was madness, they said. The West would never allow it. The markets would collapse. And yet, the idea refused to die. Because for the first time, it wasn't about profit. It was about ownership. For the first time, Africa's gold wouldn't leave Africa. In closed-door meetings, Traoré listened as advisors debated, argued, panicked. They warned of sanctions, they warned of coups, but he said nothing. He only looked out the window toward the red horizon, where the sun fell on mines worked by barefoot men. It wasn't gold he saw, it was history, and the weight of generations asking for one act of courage. Then came the ultimatum. A delegation from the IMF landed quietly, escorted under heavy protection. They met with Traoré's ministers and delivered a simple message: cancel your talks with Riyadh or lose all access to global markets. Burkina Faso's foreign reserves were already near zero. The nation was starving. To reject the IMF was to risk total collapse, but to obey them was to stay enslaved. For weeks, the palace remained silent. The world waited for an answer. Western media painted Traoré as unstable, impulsive, a populist with dangerous ambitions. Foreign banks began freezing Burkinabe assets preemptively, assuming the worst. And then, in the middle of this chaos, Traoré vanished from public view. No speeches, no press, no appearances. The rumor mills ignited again. Some said he was negotiating in secret. Others said he had been overthrown. But the truth was far more dangerous. He was waiting, watching, testing the loyalty of those around him. Because before signing anything, he needed to know who among his inner circle would stand by him and who would sell him to the West. Inside the government, three powerful men began to whisper. The Minister of Finance, the Chief of External Security, and the Governor of the Central Bank. All had Western ties, all owed favors. They knew that a gold alliance with Saudi Arabia would destroy their networks of control. And so, in secret, they reached out to old contacts, French advisors, European bankers, even mercenaries, to prepare for what they believed was inevitable, a coup dressed as stabilization. But Traoré already knew. He had intercepted their messages weeks earlier. He let them believe they were safe, while quietly moving loyal forces closer to the capital. At night, as he walked the silent halls of the palace, he thought not of revenge, but of legacy. Could he defy the same system that had killed Sankara? Could he succeed where every other African leader had failed? Outside, the wind rose again, carrying sand from the Sahara, as if the desert itself was whispering, now or never. The next morning, under a blood-orange sky, the call came from Riyadh. The Saudi representative's voice was calm, formal, almost ceremonial. They were ready to proceed. Traoré didn't hesitate. He walked into the meeting room alone. The generals waited outside. The lights flickered under the weight of the storm. He placed his hand on the document. Every word of the agreement was a defiance of centuries. Shared gold refining, mutual trade in local currencies, a promise to keep African gold in African hands. As he pressed his signature, lightning cracked the horizon, illuminating his face through the window. A young man who had chosen to risk everything. He didn't know if he would survive the year. He didn't know if his nation would stand the next week. But he knew this. History would remember this ink. For 48 hours, the world didn't react. No statements, no sanctions, just silence. And then, the floodgates opened. Headlines screamed across the globe. Burkina Faso signs unprecedented gold pact with Saudi Arabia. West Africa's rogue leader strikes at the IMF. A new axis rising in the Sahel. In Paris, panic. In Washington, confusion. In London, disbelief. They called emergency meetings, sent envoys, drafted economic retaliation plans. But it was already too late. Beneath the deserts of Burkina Faso, the first Saudi-funded refinery was already being built, guarded by soldiers loyal only to Traoré. The storm had begun. Its first thunderclap was made of gold. As the night deepened, the camera would see Ouagadougou, city lights flickering, soldiers patrolling, whispers echoing through darkened streets. In a distant corner of the palace, Traoré stood at the window again. His reflection merged with the city beyond. One man, one nation, and one impossible dream now intertwined. They thought they could contain him. They thought they could buy him. But Ibrahim Traoré wasn't building a deal. He was building a declaration, and thus began the Gold War. The world trembled in quiet disbelief. For the first time in decades, a small African nation had defied the global order. Not with weapons, not with armies, but with gold. In the first week after the signing, markets in Paris and London staggered. The CFA franc dipped. Oil traders panicked. And yet in Ouagadougou there was silence. The calm before a storm that no one could yet define. Inside Burkina Faso, the deal was whispered like a miracle and feared like a curse. On the streets, the people spoke in half-truths. Some called Traoré a savior, others a madman, but all agreed on one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. In the palace, Traoré studied reports that came by the hour. Food prices rising, imports delayed, banks in Europe blocking payments to Burkina Faso companies, aid agencies suddenly re-evaluating operations. It was a slow strangulation, polite, bureaucratic, and invisible. The IMF had not declared open war, but every lever of the system was tightening around him. The air grew heavier each day. In the north, the first rebel movements began stirring, small, well-funded, suspiciously timed. Trucks with no license plates appeared near gold routes. Local officials reported foreign agents moving across borders, claiming to be consultants. It was the old game: destabilize, divide, discredit. Still, Traoré did not flinch. He ordered the continuation of the Saudi-funded refinery at Kaya, an enormous complex designed to refine gold locally for the first time in Burkina Faso's history. Each brick laid there was an act of rebellion. Each shipment of machinery that arrived from Riyadh was a silent bullet against the old order. But while steel and gold began to rise in the desert, hunger rose in the cities. Imported wheat and fuel vanished from markets. The people waited in long, endless lines. Mothers whispered prayers under the sun, clutching coins that no longer bought anything. Every day, Traoré read the reports, the despair, the anger, and felt it closing in around him like a shadow. His ministers argued. Some urged compromise. Others begged for negotiations with the IMF. But compromise meant surrender. And surrender meant the death of everything he had built. He remained silent through their debates, watching the horizon through his window, the dust-red light of the Sahel. Beautiful and cruel. He began to move differently. Fewer public appearances, fewer speeches. Rumors spread again. They said he was afraid. They said the Saudis had betrayed him already. But Traoré's silence was not fear. It was strategy, because he knew what the world did not. The real war would not come from outside. It would come from within. 3 months after the alliance was announced, the first internal defection occurred. A senior economic advisor fled the country, carrying confidential documents. Within days, Western media published them. They showed the details of the Saudi deal, the payment structures, the currency swaps, the clauses protecting African control. The leaks were meant to humiliate Traoré, to make him look naive, reckless. But something strange happened. Across Africa, the opposite occurred. People cheered. In Mali, Niger, Chad, and Senegal, young soldiers and students held up posters of Traoré. For the first time, they saw a leader who had refused to kneel. For the first time, they believed they might be free. The West noticed this too. The propaganda machines changed tone, The headlines shifted from mockery to fear. The Traoré Doctrine, they began to call it, a dangerous model of African defiance. Pressure intensified. The IMF announced targeted sanctions. Western banking systems cut access to Burkina Faso's international reserves. French companies withdrew. Shipments of medicine and food were delayed for inspection. The system was closing in like a fist. And then came the bombshell. Late one night, in a small mining town near the Mali border, a convoy transporting refined gold disappeared. Dozens of guards gone. Trucks vanished into the desert. No trace, no witnesses. It was a ghost event, and it changed everything. International media erupted again. They accused Traoré of smuggling gold through illicit channels. Western intelligence agencies claimed the gold had been traded to fund militias. But within the palace, the truth was far murkier. The convoy had been carrying the first shipment of gold destined for Saudi Arabia, a symbol of the alliance's birth. Now it was gone. Traoré called no meeting. He said nothing publicly. But behind closed doors, he began to move his pieces. Loyal units were deployed. Surveillance teams activated. The country's internal network went dark for 2 days. Those 2 days would later become legend, the silent hours, when no one knew what the government was doing, only that something immense was shifting. In those hours, soldiers in plain clothes hunted through the capital, tracing digital trails, listening to intercepted communications. They found evidence of sabotage, encrypted transmissions from a foreign embassy, payments made to rebel commanders, instructions to destroy proof of involvement. It was no random robbery. It was a message. Traoré did not sleep that night. From the palace balcony, he looked out over the city, dark, still, fragile. He understood now that this was not about gold. It was about control. They could not allow an African nation to break free of the currency web. They could not allow sovereignty to exist outside their grip. The next morning, the city woke to a different kind of silence. Military trucks rolled through the streets. Several high-ranking officials were arrested without explanation. Rumors spread faster than the truth, that there had been a coup, that Traoré was dead, that Saudi Arabia had withdrawn. None were true, but the confusion served his purpose. It flushed out the rest of the traitors. Far from the capital, deep in the desert, soldiers discovered the missing convoy. The trucks were burned, their frames twisted by fire. The gold was gone, but buried beneath the wreckage, inside a sealed steel box, they found a black drive, encrypted, untouched by the flames. When Traoré received it, he locked himself away with his intelligence chief. Hours passed. No one knows what he saw, but witnesses recalled his expression when he emerged. Calm, distant, almost sorrowful. That night, he ordered a complete overhaul of the nation's gold transport network and the creation of a new, secret facility for reserve storage. No foreign official would ever know where it was located. As the weeks went on, the economy continued to suffocate. Bread lines stretched for blocks. The young and the desperate began to protest. And yet even amid anger, there was something different, an undercurrent of faith. People spoke quietly of endurance. They said, if we can survive this, we will never be slaves again. In Saudi Arabia, officials stood firm. Their media remained silent, their support invisible but unwavering. Shipments of fuel and grain began arriving under humanitarian labels. Each one carried no flag, no signature, but everyone knew where it came from. The international community grew nervous. A new kind of alliance was forming, one that ignored the Western system entirely. A network of nations trading quietly, building in secret. They called it shadow economics, but for Africa, it was the beginning of independence. Traoré moved carefully now. Every step measured, every decision deliberate. His advisors called him colder, harder, less forgiving, but he had to be. Every man around him was a possible weapon turned against him. One evening, as dusk painted the city in amber, he visited a mining camp unannounced. The workers froze when they saw him. He didn't speak, didn't promise, didn't pose. He only stood there, watching as men swung their picks into the earth that had cursed and blessed them both. It was there he made his decision. The alliance would continue, no matter the cost. He returned to the capital and gave one order. The refinery must open within the year. Whether the world burned or not, the weeks that followed blurred into chaos. Rebels advanced in the north. Western media called it the beginning of Traoré's fall, but he did not fall. He reorganized. The army, broken and poor, began to transform into something new, disciplined, local, unshakable. And beneath the surface, a new mystery emerged. Unknown trucks began to move across the borders at night, unmarked and unregistered. No one knew what they carried. Some said gold, others said documents. Some whispered of something greater, a plan hidden even from his closest allies. The air thickened with tension, secrecy, and the weight of something vast approaching. Even his enemies began to sense it, the feeling that this was not just about one country's survival. Something larger was being forged in the dust and silence of Burkina Faso. And in the stillness before dawn, Ibrahim Traoré stood at his window once more, watching the lights of his sleepless capital. The wind carried the sound of distant drums, protests, chants, echoes of 1,000 hopes. He knew the breaking point was near. The next move would decide everything. The gold was no longer just gold. It had become the heartbeat of a continent. The morning broke with a heaviness that could be felt in the bones of the city. The sky hung low, gray and swollen, as if the heavens themselves were watching. For weeks, the tension had been unbearable. Rumors flooded the streets faster than the rainwater in the gutters, of an assassination plot, of Saudi withdrawal, of a coup brewing in the barracks. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was thick and electric. Traoré's inner circle had shrunk to a handful of men and women, people who had proven loyalty through silence, not words. They met in a dimly lit chamber, maps and reports scattered across the table. Gold production had slowed. 2 refineries had been sabotaged. Armed groups were pushing closer to key transport routes. But there was something else. Intelligence reports showed unusual satellite activity over northern Burkina Faso. American and French surveillance. Drones patrolling routes they had never cared about before. Something was coming, and everyone in that room knew it. Traoré sat quietly at the head of the table. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shout. He only listened to the updates, the fears, the proposals. Then when the room fell silent, he spoke. Let them come. This time, they will not find a puppet waiting. His words carried the cold certainty of a man who had already accepted what was about to unfold. He ordered the closure of several border crossings and the activation of a secret directive, Operation Sahel Shield. It was a contingency plan known only to a few, designed for a single purpose: survival when surrounded. As the orders rippled through the military, soldiers began to move under cover of night. Supply depots were emptied. Anti-air batteries were repositioned. Key roads were blocked. And in the northern deserts, outposts that had been silent for years suddenly came alive. Lights flickering, engines roaring. The West didn't wait long. A coordinated series of joint operations was announced under the banner of counterterrorism. French and ECOWAS troops moved toward Burkina Faso's borders. Officially, they were there to stabilize the region. But in Ouagadougou, everyone knew what it meant. They were coming for the gold, and for the man who had dared to claim it. The first explosions hit before dawn. Drone strikes, surgical and precise. They targeted a convoy near the Niger border, the same route believed to be carrying refined gold bound for Saudi Arabia. The trucks burned for hours, lighting up the desert sky like a funeral pyre. In the capital, chaos erupted. Communication lines went down. The power grid flickered. Foreign media flooded with breaking headlines. Crisis in Burkina Faso. Traoré under siege. Saudi alliance collapses. But the alliance did not collapse. In Riyadh, behind closed doors, a meeting was held between senior officials. Within hours, discreet shipments began moving out. Not gold, not oil, but weapons and fuel. They would never be traced. On paper, they didn't exist. But in reality, they were lifelines. Traoré's forces fought like men possessed. They had no air cover, no advanced drones, no satellite data. But they knew the terrain, every ridge, every dry riverbed, every shadow. And they fought for something larger than orders. They fought for dignity. In one of the fiercest battles near the town of Dori, a small detachment of Burkina soldiers ambushed a heavily armed column of foreign-backed mercenaries. The fight lasted hours. sand, smoke, and gunfire swallowing the world. When it was over, the Burkina Faso flag still flew over the town, torn but defiant. Traoré received the report in silence. Then he gave his next command, one that would shift the entire war. He ordered the gold reserves moved out of the capital, not to Saudi Arabia, not to another country, but to a secret underground vault built under the unfinished refinery in Kaya, a place no satellite could see. The decision was madness to some, genius to others, but it was pure strategy. The gold was the lifeblood of the rebellion. Whoever controlled it, controlled the future. The days that followed became a blur of violence and misinformation. Western channels showed images of chaos, burned streets, crowds, soldiers in panic. But the truth on the ground was different. The nation was not collapsing. It was transforming. Local militias rose, not for pay, but for pride. Women carried food to the front lines. Students turned classrooms into makeshift communication centers. The whole country became an organism, united by resistance. It wasn't order. It was something more dangerous, conviction. Then came the message that changed everything. An intercepted transmission traced to a Western embassy. It revealed a planned operation to assassinate Traoré within 72 hours. The hit team was already in the country, disguised as aid workers. The information came from an unexpected source, a Saudi intelligence officer risking his career to deliver it. Traoré's response was swift and surgical. Within a night, his forces surrounded a luxury compound in the capital. Gunfire echoed for hours. When it ended, 12 men were dead. Among them, 3 foreign operatives carrying diplomatic passports. The world media exploded. Traoré executes foreign diplomats. Burkina Faso isolated. But isolation meant nothing now. He had survived the attempt, and the people saw it for what it was. Proof that the enemy had come for him personally. That night, the streets filled not with fear, but with chants. Africa will not kneel, they shouted. Children waved flags, men wept. The city, once choking in despair, began to breathe again. Meanwhile, in the desert, something extraordinary was happening. Engineers at the Kaya refinery had worked night and day, powered by generators and guarded by soldiers. And now, despite war, despite sabotage, despite the blockade, molten gold finally poured through the system. The first bar of refined Burkina Faso gold, stamped not with the mark of France, but with the crest of its own nation. When Traoré held that gold bar in his hands, it wasn't wealth he saw. It was freedom. It was proof that they could break the cycle, that they didn't need permission to exist. But freedom always has a cost. As the refinery celebrated, intelligence confirmed a new threat, a massive buildup of foreign forces along the western border. The largest mobilization since the start of the crisis. This would not be sabotage. It would be invasion. Traoré called an emergency council. His generals debated strategy, but he barely spoke. When the room fell silent, he simply said, "If they want our gold, they will have to bury themselves beneath it." Outside, thunder rolled across the desert. Inside, the final battle for Africa's sovereignty began to take shape. The world would soon witness something it hadn't seen in centuries. A nation too small to matter on the map, standing alone against empires not out of arrogance, but out of the sheer will to be free. And somewhere far away, in the polished corridors of Riyadh, an unnamed official watched the chaos unfold on a muted television screen. He whispered quietly to himself, "This is only the beginning." The night before the storm, Ouagadougou was silent. The city lights dimmed as if the land itself was holding its breath. Every window flickered with candlelight. Every street whispered of uncertainty. The wind carried the smell of rain and gunpowder, a reminder that dawn might not come peacefully. Across the borders, thousands of foreign troops waited. Satellite images showed armored convoys lined up like teeth along the western edge of Burkina Faso. Intelligence briefings estimated the assault could begin within 48 hours. The official story was humanitarian intervention. But no one believed that anymore. In the capital, Ibrahim Traoré stood on the balcony of the presidential residence, overlooking the darkened city. The air was thick and electric. He could see faint traces of smoke rising in the distance, the remains of drone strikes that had missed their mark earlier that day. Somewhere out there, men were dying for something they couldn't even name. He closed his eyes. In the silence of that moment, the weight of a continent pressed upon his shoulders. He was no longer fighting for Burkina Faso alone. He was fighting for every broken promise, every betrayed leader, every stolen resource that had chained Africa for centuries. Inside the war room, the last meeting began. Maps covered the walls, lines drawn in red and black ink. The faces in the room were worn, sleepless, and pale. They knew what was coming. They also knew they couldn't win, not in the traditional sense. But they could resist, and that, in history, had always been enough to ignite something greater. Traoré issued the order: total lockdown of the capital. No retreat, no surrender. He ordered his gold reserves secured deep underground, a vault beneath the Kaya refinery, protected by reinforced steel and buried sensors. Above it, soldiers stood ready, not to defend wealth, but to defend the symbol it had become. The first wave of the attack began at dawn. The sky roared with the sound of jets. Explosions lit the horizon. Dust rose like ghosts over the desert plains. Communication towers fell one by one. The invaders struck hard and fast. Precision missiles, armored divisions, electronic warfare. It was a modern assault against a nation still fighting with grit and conviction. But something was wrong. The foreign forces met resistance in unexpected places. Ambushes in the dunes, traps along the roads, entire units vanishing into the landscape. The Burkina Faso forces weren't fighting defensively anymore. They were fighting with strategy, guiding the enemy deeper into the heart of the desert, where the terrain itself turned against them. Traoré had predicted this. Months earlier, he had ordered his engineers to prepare underground communication lines, hidden tunnels connecting key military outposts, invisible to satellites. When the airwaves went dark, his army didn't. They moved like shadows, unseen, coordinated by whispers and instinct. By the second day, the invaders grew frustrated. They seized small towns, raised their flags, and broadcast their victories. But the gold vault, the heart of the resistance, remained untouched, and that was all that mattered. Then, late on the third night, the world changed. A massive explosion lit up the northern horizon, a column of fire rising into the sky. Reports spread like wildfire. A convoy of foreign armored vehicles had been destroyed while attempting to breach the refinery perimeter. Dozens dead. The refinery still standing. Traoré watched the flames from the command post. His hands rested on the table, still and steady. His advisors urged evacuation, but he shook his head. No, if I leave now, the idea dies with me. He stayed. Throughout the night, the attacks continued. Artillery pounded the outskirts of the capital. Missiles struck empty buildings. The power grid failed. Yet somehow the Burkina Faso radio kept broadcasting, a single frequency repeating a simple message: hold your ground. Africa is watching. In distant cities, the message caught fire. In Mali, Niger, and Guinea, crowds gathered in the streets, waving flags, chanting Traoré's name. Across Africa, the impossible was happening. Unity born out of defiance. By dawn, the foreign coalition began to falter. Their supply lines stretched thin, their communications jammed. Footage leaked of their own troops refusing orders. They hadn't expected this kind of resistance, not from a country they had dismissed as weak. Then came the moment that defined everything. A column of armored vehicles, backed by drones, finally breached the outer defenses of the Kaya refinery. They advanced toward the vault, determined to seize the gold. But as they approached, they found something they didn't expect. Silence. No guards, no gunfire. Just the hum of the desert wind. The lead commander ordered his men forward. The doors to the vault were slightly open. When they entered, the lights flickered on, revealing rows of empty storage racks. The gold was gone. A single message was carved into the concrete wall. Africa's wealth belongs to its people. It was a trap, not of explosives, but of humiliation. The real gold had been moved days earlier, smuggled out under the guise of humanitarian convoys. Its location unknown, guarded by the alliance itself. The news spread instantly. Across the world, markets plunged. The value of the dollar wavered. In Riyadh, a quiet celebration took place. Saudi officials smiling behind closed doors. The West had invaded for treasure and found only their reflection in the ruins. As the sun rose over the battered city, Traoré stepped out onto the roof of the command post. The sky was scarred with smoke, but in that light, something pure glimmered through. He had survived the unthinkable. His people had endured the impossible. Below him, the city began to stir, civilians emerging from shelters, soldiers raising torn flags, children running through the dust with laughter that sounded like prophecy. He looked over them, and for the first time in weeks, allowed himself to breathe. He knew the war wasn't over. Sanctions would come, lies would follow, but something irreversible had happened. The spell was broken, the illusion of power shattered. Africa had stood on its feet and refused to kneel. And in that quiet, as the wind carried the scent of iron and smoke, a single thought crossed his mind. They came for gold and left with a lesson. The world would never look at Burkina Faso the same way again. When the dust finally settled over Ouagadougou, it was as if the land itself exhaled. For days, the city had been wrapped in silence, a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls, the windows, the very breath of the people. But then, slowly, life began to return. Markets reopened. Generators hummed to life. The streets that had once echoed with gunfire now trembled beneath the sound of footsteps, cautious, uncertain, but alive. The war had ended without a declaration, without signatures or treaties. It had simply burned itself out. The invading forces withdrew under the pretext of strategic reassessment. The coalition fractured, arguments erupting between nations that once called themselves allies. And in the ruins of their retreat, a truth became clear to the world. The smallest nation on their map had defied them. For Ibrahim Traoré, the days that followed were not victory, but revelation. He walked through the damaged streets, his boots crunching over broken glass and bullet casings. Children ran to him waving torn flags. Mothers wept as they pressed his hands to their foreheads. He said little because there was nothing left to say. The faces of the fallen haunted him. The weight of every choice still sat heavy in his chest. Yet amid the ruins, hope began to breathe again. The refinery in Kaya, once the target of the world's greed, resumed operations. This time, its output was not secretive nor smuggled. It was nationalized. Gold bars stamped with Burkina Faso's insignia began to roll out, shining like symbols of rebirth. But more than wealth, they represented something deeper: control, dignity, and independence. Across Africa, something stirred. In Mali, new policies mirrored Traoré's gold initiative. In Niger, the president announced plans for regional trade free from Western currency systems. In Ghana and Chad, protests erupted, not for chaos, but for freedom. The world's old order was beginning to tremble. Western media tried to rewrite the story. They spoke of regional instability, populist leadership, economic recklessness. But the truth could not be buried anymore. For every lie, a new image surfaced, of villages rebuilding with their own hands, of children returning to schools built from the ground up by their communities, of women leading reconstruction efforts. In Riyadh, a quiet alliance deepened. Saudi engineers arrived under humanitarian banners, bringing technology, solar grids, and construction teams. They didn't speak to the press. They didn't pose for cameras. They worked side by side with Burkina Faso laborers. They built what would become the largest gold-backed reserve facility in West Africa, secure, independent, untouchable. Traoré never called it a victory. He called it a beginning. At night, he would sit alone in the presidential courtyard, the sound of crickets breaking the stillness. The air smelled of dust and iron. Sometimes he would look up at the stars, countless, endless, eternal, and think of all the men before him who had tried and failed to free their people. Sankara, Lumumba, and Nkrumah. Their faces flickered in his memory, like ghosts of unfinished dreams. But now, something had changed. The torch had not died. It had been passed, carried, and reignited. Weeks later, the first international broadcast from Burkina Faso since the crisis aired. No grand speeches, no propaganda, just a simple single-camera message. Ibrahim Traoré standing before a weathered flag. His uniform worn, his eyes clear, he spoke plainly. We have no empire, no nuclear weapons, no vast oceans or factories. But we have something the world cannot take: our faith in ourselves. The era of dependence is over. Let the world know Africa does not beg. Africa builds. The recording spread like wildfire. Across the continent, people replayed his words through phones, radios, and street screens. For the first time in decades, Africa's youth felt not just anger, but pride. They had a symbol, a face that told them resistance was not madness, it was survival. The IMF quietly revised its position on Burkina Faso. International investors began to return, cautiously, under new terms. For once, the contracts favored the host nation. For once, the profit stayed within its borders. In the markets, gold prices surged. Western economies reeled under their own panic. But in Ouagadougou, no one celebrated the fall of others. They celebrated their own rise, slow, steady, humble. Farmers returned to their fields. Miners received fair wages. Roads scarred by tanks were repaved by volunteers. And one evening, months after the final missile had fallen, the sun dipped low over the horizon, turning the sky to molten gold. Ibrahim Traoré stood before a crowd of citizens, men, women, children, their faces illuminated by the light of a new dawn. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The people knew. The wind swept across the crowd, carrying whispers that sounded almost like a song. A chant born not of defiance, but of rebirth. We are free. Somewhere far beyond that horizon, world leaders watched in silence. They couldn't understand how a nation so small, so fragile, had shaken the foundations of their system. But those who did understand, those who felt the pulse of change, saw what was coming. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a reawakening. As the night descended, the city lights shimmered like stars fallen to the earth. And in that moment it was clear, the war for gold had never been about metal. It had been about memory, about the right to stand tall, about the belief that Africa's soul was not for sale. The camera of imagination would rise above the city, showing rooftops, rivers, mountains bathed in golden dusk. The narrator's final words would linger like an echo through time. They came for profit and power, but left with a lesson carved in stone. For in the heart of a small nation, beneath the weight of centuries, something unbreakable awoke. And as the world watched, one question remained. Was this the moment Africa began to remember who it truly was?